Hello and welcome to this week's Meals of the Week video. I'm starting off with a stuffed pizza. I'm calling it a stuffed pizza. It's basically kind of Chicago style, but I don't want to call it that because it's probably as inauthentically Chicago style as you can probably get. I am using the Trader Joe's pre-made refrigerated pizza dough. I bought two of these because you do need one for the bottom, one for the top. I soon realized that I really probably only needed one of the packages of dough since the dish that I was using was really just a smaller, I think it's a 9-inch cake pan. So probably could have gotten away with just one. So you can see I have a bigger dough ball here, and that is going to go for the bottom, or what I thought was going to go for the bottom, and I have a smaller piece, half of a package for the top, quote-unquote lid. I'm putting down some cornmeal and spreading it out, and I'm going to basically coat the larger dough ball in the cornmeal. Turn my sights on the little guy here, and I'm actually just using olive oil for the bottom of that. I did end up just going ahead and using some cornmeal later on. Okay, so I'm going to move along to prepping the cake pan. Set aside the dough. This is the 9-inch, I think it's 9-inch cake pan that I'm using, and I'm going to spread it liberally with some softened butter. I do store my butter on the countertop in an airtight container, and it is perfectly malleable, soft and spreadable. So I'm doing that, coating all the sides of the cake pan so that the dough doesn't stick at all, and it worked out perfectly. I'm now going to take the large dough ball that was coated in the cornmeal. I'm taking a rolling pin and I'm going to try to get that rolled out large enough to cover the bottom of the cake pan. So I measured, it was roughly, I think this is like a, one of those larger baking sheets, so it's probably about 13 inches wide. Let's try to get the dough as wide as that. There you go. So that I think is going to fit the cake pan. I'm going to take the dough, transfer it to the cake pan, and then I'm going to just try to spread it out like you would a normal pie. As I do this, as I press it into the pan, I'm going to try to squeeze out all of the air bubbles that kind of accumulated at the bottom, got trapped in there. And also I'm feeling around, and I'm noticing that the dough is quite thick. So again, this is just, not a super deep cake pan. So what I ended up doing, and I lost the clip of me doing this, but I did trim the dough. You can see here, I kind of stretched it out a little bit thinner so that I would have more room for a filling, and I just trimmed off that excess dough. I filled it with some pre-cooked mild Italian sausage, and then I'm going to just fill it with the rest of the filling. I've got some pepperoni here, and then some more, and some mozzarella cheese. I did want to put more cheese in here, but again, the dish was just not, the cake pan wasn't deep enough and the dough was super thick. So it kind of limited the amount of stuff that I could put inside. But I did my best, and I've got some, here's that shredded mozzarella cheese. Here I'm taking the smaller dough ball, and I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the bottom. So I'm going to roll it out. I end up using some cornmeal on here to dust onto the dough to keep it from sticking to the rolling pin. So that is what I do, and once I get it to the proper size that's going to cover and be the lid of the stuffed pizza, I'm going to transfer it now to the top of the dish. Take the dough, lay it on top, and I'm going to kind of press it to the bottom dough to seal it. Make sure all the stuffing is inside. And because it's going to be completely sealed, I'm going to make little vents by tearing little tiny holes in the top. You can also do this with a knife, but I just decided to use my fingers. And I'm also going to try to push down the filling a bit and create like a recessed area for the sauce, since the sauce is going to go on the top. I did want to add a little bit more sauce than I actually did, but because again the pie pan was a little bit shallow, didn't have that much room, so I did the best I could and I added the pizza sauce on top. So here's that sauce. It's just a Kroger jarred sauce. I doctored it in the jar itself. I put some garlic powder, onion powder. I did put some oregano in there as well. You can see it's nice and thick, and I just spread it as evenly as possible, trying to avoid any areas where there is no sauce. I didn't want it to bubble up, so I just wanted to make sure there's some sauce all over the top. Pretty much take it right to the edge there. And then I have a little mixture of grated Parmesan cheese and a little bit more oregano in here, and that goes on top of the pizza and then into the oven at 475 until it's nice and golden brown. So we want to make sure the crust is cooked, but it's nice and golden brown. I think it was about 20 to 25 minutes for this size. And here it is once it's all done. You can see it's puffed up nicely. The crust is nice and golden brown. I did use cauliflower thins from Trader Joe's for my keto style pizza. These were super teeny tiny, but they tasted delicious. They did not crisp up like a normal pizza dough would, but had a really good flavor, a nice texture, and I had my little pizzas there to go along with the larger stuffed pizza for the guys. I did have a teeny tiny sliver. It was delicious. The Trader Joe's pre-made dough is really good. So you can see here I'm trying to take it out of the cake pan, and buttering it liberally is the trick, and I think also dusting the dough in cornmeal also is a good trick. You can see it came out super easy. I had no problems at all. Crust is nice and done and brown, and then I just do my flip and I'm going to cut into it to serve. There you go. That's exactly what it looks like. You can see the dough is pretty thick along the edge there, but it was really good. This was a nice combination. I think maybe next time if I have a bigger dish, I'm going to put some olives in there. I think that would be, some black olives would be really delicious, and more cheese for sure. But it was really yummy. So here you go. Just a side salad of some leftover coleslaw mix. Rob wanted Asian dressing on his. And here's my, my 2 mini pizzas on the cauliflower thins, and I have Caesar dressing on mine. And that was our dinner, our first dinner for the week. Next up, we have French onion chicken. I'm taking some extra virgin olive oil and coating the pan. I'm going to heat that up, and I'm going to saute and cook down the I used two large onions that I sliced to about 1/4 inch thick. The recipe for this will be linked down below. I did get it from Pinterest, so if you want to try to make this, it will be down below. Once the oil is heated up, I go ahead and add the onions and quickly realize that I probably should have used a larger pan, but I figured the onions are going to cook down and I'll have enough room to at least saute them and caramelize them a bit, so I just went with it. I'm going to try to toss it a little bit and then later on put a lid on it so that it can cook down a little bit more. So that is how I'm prepping the onions. I believe on the website or the blog that I got this recipe from, it mentions how you can cook the onions in a crock pot, I think, if you're going to do a large quantity. So if you want to do that, check out the link below. The recipe mentions to continue cooking the onions for about 45 minutes until they are nice and caramelized. So I'm going to try to do this. Again, I just had a bit of difficulty because the pan was a little bit too small. But as you can see here, I keep checking, and as the onions soften, it becomes a lot easier to move them around in the pan. And I'm just going to continue doing this until it gets to that golden brown, sort of caramelized stage before continuing to use them in the recipe. Moving on to prepping the chicken part of the recipe, I've moved the onions to literally the back burner to continue to cook. I've put some extra virgin olive oil in the pan up front for the chicken, heating up the oil, and then I am going to put the chicken in when that oil is ready. Seasoning the chicken here with salt and pepper. I'm going to brown them on both sides about, I think the recipe said about 5 minutes on each side. And then I'm going to periodically check the onions in the back and give them a toss. Now, I've always had issues browning the chicken in this particular sauce pan, but they don't really get brown is basically what I'm trying to say, and they stick to the pan even with the extra virgin olive oil, but I'm not necessarily concerned with that. Perhaps a cast iron pan would work really, really well, but this is what I had. I'm really just trying to sear the chicken because it's going to continue cooking in the oven. I had 4 pieces of chicken. I just halved it and cooked them into smaller batches, and this is the second batch here. You can see all of the chicken that's stuck to the bottom of the pan, but I'll sort of deglaze that a little bit later once I add the onions and some liquid. At this stage, I sort of deviate from the recipe a little bit again. Rather than continuing with the onions and adding the rest of the ingredients to the onions, I'm actually going to move the onions to the pan into which the chicken was cooking. So you'll see that here the onions kind of get to that brown caramelized state. And then I'm going to add some of the broth. I did use water and chicken bouillon rather than like a chicken stock or a chicken broth. But you can see I'm trying to scrape the bottom of the pan with a little bit of that liquid. I lost a teeny tiny clip, but that's some seasoning there. Again, the recipe is down in the link below. So that's some flour that I added per the recipe. I'm just going to mix it up until the flour kind of cooks out before continuing with the rest of the ingredients. Adding half of the stock as the recipe calls for, and then I'm going to continue deglazing the pan there and cooking out the flour until the mixture becomes thicker. Removing about a third of the onions to a separate bowl, again, as the recipe calls for. These onions are going to be placed on top of the chicken before it goes into the oven, and I will add the rest of the broth to the onions that remain in the pan. To the sauce, we're going to add some vinegar and some Dijon mustard here, as well as a bit of Worcestershire sauce. Stir that around until the sauce thickens, and then I'm going to do a little taste test, adjust, and continue to cook until this is ready for the oven. Adding a bit more time here after the taste test. Second taste test just to double check, and then we're going to be ready to go for the rest of the recipe. time to add the chicken back in. Well, not back in, but to add the chicken to the sauce. I'm going to cover it with, again, the onions that I had set aside from earlier, and then that is going to go into the oven. Into the oven. So you want to make sure, and I should have mentioned this earlier, that you want to use an oven-proof container for this part of the recipe. I'm now going to just cook the cauliflower. I'm using riced cauliflower as a side for the dish. You could use rice, you can make a pasta, but I am just prepping this in the oven. It's like a steam in the bag, so I bought this from Aldi. It's a garlic and herbed flavored riced cauliflower. Out of the oven comes the chicken about 5 minutes before it's technically done, and I'm going to top it with some cheese. I'm using some Munster cheese slices because this is what I had. The recipe calls for some shredded Gruyere or some Gouda, but I thought Munster would work fine. And this goes back into the oven now to broil for just a few minutes until the cheese is nice and melted and brown. And as you can see, this is what it looks like here. Served with some cauliflower rice. Just put a bit of the sauce down at the bottom of the plate, and then I will top it with the chicken, and we're ready for dinner. And that is the French onion chicken. Next up, we have a beef pot pie. We've got some mixed veg here of some carrot, green beans, some corn, and some pre-cooked potatoes. Recipe is down below, so please check it out for the complete list of ingredients and the quantity. I added some pre-cooked ground beef that unfortunately I forgot to pre-season, so the recipe was a little bit more bland than I would have liked, but make sure you season the ground beef ahead of time. I'm adding to that some Kroger cream of chicken, some salt and pepper. I'm going to toss that, and this is going to be the filling for the beef pot pie. Once that's all mixed throughout, I am going to set it aside and take a pan. This is just a 9-inch, I think it's a 9-inch cake pan, and some store pie crust. I've had this particular one in the fridge for a while, so it's a bit on the dry side. I let it sit out for a little bit longer and then decided, you know what, I'm going to use that for the top because it's not going to quite hold together for the bottom. So you can see this is the second pie crust that I had also in the fridge, so I let that sit out, and it is a lot more pliable because it wasn't as old as the first one. I am just going to fit it into the cake pan that I greased, and you can see here, even though it kind of splits, I just push the dough together, and you'll see that in a little bit. I push the pie crust together and seal the little holes at the bottom. So just going to fit that as you would a normal pie crust into the cake pan. At this point, I add the filling to the pie crust. And top with the second pie crust. I am not concerned about the cracks in the top at this point, since I'm going to be making little slits to vent the pie, but I am going to fold down the excess crust and sort of try to crimp it as best I can to the bottom crust. Piercing the top to create those venting slits so the steam can escape. And brushing with an egg wash of 1 beaten egg. Once the crust is golden brown from the oven, I just pull it out, and that is the finished pie. Again, I mentioned that I didn't season the ground beef, so it was a little bit more bland than I would have liked, but overall it was a solid pie, very easy to do, and I would do it again, just season the beef. Diving in here to see if I can slice you a piece to show you what the inside looks like. As you well may know, the first slice is always the hardest to remove from the pan. So I had a bit of difficulty, the struggle was real, but trust that the subsequent slices came out much cleaner than this first one. Going in for the taste test, the pie had been sitting out to cool, but this is what it looks like. The filling was nice and hearty, it really was. It just really needed some salt because of my oversight, but that was our dinner for the evening. And lastly for the week, I have Nilagang Baka, which is basically a Filipino beef stew. I am boiling some water here and adding to it 1 whole onion that I cut up into about 8 large chunks. And then I have some beef chuck roast here that I chunked up into like big, about 2-inch pieces or so. You can use any other kind of stew meat, and ideally I probably should have done this in a crock pot, just so that I could have a bit of freedom, but this ended up cooking for about 3.5 hours on the stove top. I added to that some pepper. The recipe does call for traditionally using like whole black peppercorns, which I did not have, so I went ahead and just used some black pepper. I'm mixing up everything to make sure that the ingredients are coated or not coated, but covered by the water, and then I'm going to bring that to a boil. Once it's to a boil, I'm going to skim off that sort of scum, as they call it, remove that and bring the heat back down to like a low and simmer it until I'm ready to move on and the beef is nice and super tender. After a couple hours, the beef is nice and tender, so I just checked that there, and I'm going to add now some corn on the cob. Once that's simmered again for just about 20 minutes or so, I'm going to add the rest of the ingredients. I am using a bok choy here. Not the baby kind, but the full-grown bok choy. I'm putting in the thicker part of the stem, and then adding some green onion as well. I'm going to cook that before I put in the green part of the green leaves. Seasoning with some salt. Just giving it a taste here to see if it needs any more salt or pepper. now the softer part of the stem, the green leafy part. So this soup is basically done, just waiting for the greens to continue cooking. I am going to add some fish sauce to this. Just a little bit will do you for a little bit more salt, like a saltier flavor, and kind of, I don't know, there's a certain flavor that fish sauce has that it really kind of needs. So I put just barely a teaspoon in, probably, for the entire pot, and that is pretty much ready to go. Is the finished soup. You can serve this with some rice, would be absolutely delicious. I served mine just plain as is here. I hope you guys enjoyed our meals of the week. I know this video was really a rather lengthy one. However, I have decided to add some timestamps down below so you can easily jump around to whichever recipe you'd like to view. Again, check the links for the recipes that I do have, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.